Everybody's ready? I'm ready to start? Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. We're going to talk about a significant natural areas, or what we call it nowadays, we call it ecosystem and indigenous biodiversity. So you have heard quite a bit about SNIs. It has come in to you in a few workshops because there has been a lot of changes in terms of government direction with the NPS notified, and then a draft NPS on indigenous biodiversity notified, and then pulled back, and then back into the government again. So yeah, there has been kind of a few changes, and we have paused during that time. I must say that Jeriel, unfortunately, is not here. She's in India at the moment, but she's the one that is leading this chapter. So Fleur and I, we're going to take the lead for the workshops today. So just recapping the issue, in Napier we really have a problem with biodiversity and ecosystems and indigenous habitats really that support our biodiversity. There's only nearly 6% of our land area in Napier is considered SNIs, and that is really, really sad and really, really small. We are a city, so you would expect that a city would have a little bit lower than a district-wide area in terms of percentage, but we really want to address that through the district plan and many other methods as well. So with a little amount, if we don't protect it through the district plan, there's a high risk that we can lose these areas. And I explain as well some of the central government context with the introduction of the NPSs and the changes on direction that have been highlighted by the new government as well. However, we don't have any new legislation yet with the national government. So what we've done so far is we got an ecologist. We hired Jerry Kessels from Blue Water Ecologists to do a review of all the SNIs that we had identified in 2019 for the draft district plan. And I asked them to review those SNIs in relation to the criteria expressed in the national policy statement. So with that exercise, that's really what we're going to talk now, what are his findings of that review. So we have a report as well as a map with highlight significant natural areas and other areas that are not significant, but they are called restoration areas. Sorry, Fleur is going to connect now to the map so she can zoom in the different areas so you can have a look at that. So you can see the history is pretty obvious. That is really our main one. What we're looking here is the areas in pink, in that pink, around the history, around the airport there, and East Hills as well in Bayview. So all of those pink areas are called SNIs, and the green areas are identified restoration areas. So the ecologists found a few, after doing the assessment, some sites have been removed. The original sites that we did the assessment and the criteria of Section 6 of the RMA have been removed because obviously the criteria has changed. There have been adjustment into some sites, but overall, the amount of hectares identified as SNIs kind of has remained the same, which is a good thing. Something important to notice, he has highlighted all these areas on the border of the rivers as very important for supporting biodiversity. So those are new areas that we didn't have highlighted when we notified the draft district plan. Yes, please. We're going to go back to the presentation. So the purpose of the chapter in in a nutshell, the purpose of the ecologies, the SNI chapter in the district plan is to protect the indigenous biodiversity, but also is to balance, like we do in planning. Everything is about balancing, protecting, and also in allowing for respecting the private landowners' rights as well. And the second objective is to align with the national policy statement. So we pretty much bound down, we have to abide to the NPS, and we have to include those rules in the district plan. Now I'm going to pass to Fleur to talk about the policy approach.
Sure, thanks.
Is this working?
Yep.
Is the green light on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Just pull it a little bit. Okay, so the idea for this chapter is for it to sit within the district-wide activities, which means that these rules will apply across all zones, but obviously only where we're mapped and we're relevant to ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversities. I guess the objectives of our approach are really to maintain and encourage Indigenous biodiversity district-wide, to identify, preserve and connect biodiversity corridors, to ensure that ecological function, and to protect, maintain and enhance biodiversity in significant natural areas. We're also adopting a precautionary approach, and what that means is where it's unknown in terms of what an activity's effects might be or uncertain, then we are much more likely to take a more protective approach to it. So precaution, we're cautious with the way that we respond to applications if information is unknown or uncertain. Okay, so the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, it has a number of requirements, and it's really thread throughout the entire NPS around the requirement to involve tangata whenua in the policy creation and decision making for Indigenous biodiversity. So it's very clear on what our requirements are in that regard. And there are a number of directives around how we manage subdivision and the use of land, and also what we're calling carve-outs. So those are sort of exemptions, really. So they're saying take a protective stance, avoid these effects in most situations. However, there may be some circumstances where that's not an appropriate approach. So, for example, if there is specified infrastructure, so if you're putting in a new specified infrastructure or expansion of that meets that definition, then it has a more permissive approach to managing SNAs. Similarly, if you've got an existing site which was created prior to this NPS coming out, there's an allowance for a single residential dwelling to be built on that land, with a number of provisos with that as well.
Just a question, Councillor Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is specified infrastructure?
Sorry, specified, yes. There is a definition. Essentially, actually it's probably, if I just go to, okay. So it's around infrastructure that delivers a lifeline utility as defined under the CDM Act. Regionally or nationally significant infrastructure which is identified in a national policy statement or the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement or regional statement or plan, infrastructure necessary to support housing development, and is identified in a relevant strategy document such as the Future Development Strategy or Spatial Strategy. Public flood control, flood protection or drainage works carried out by specific organisations, and also defence facilities operated by the New Zealand Defence Force. So, yeah.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, quite a lot.
There's not much that's not specified.
Yeah, it's really recognising the public benefit of those large-scale services, and that I guess there's a hierarchy in play here in terms of how we manage our SNAs.
But in a way, it will still be, you can still protect the SNA, so, but it is a little bit more enabling, so you allow for management rather than avoidance of that activity. You allow that activity, but you can manage it in a way that maybe it's not located right there where you have your high-value SNA, or there are some way that you can mitigate that, and you assist that through a resource consent process.
The other exemption, which is specified in the NPS, is specified Māori land, and so there's a real recognition that Māori land, as defined under the Te Ture Whenua Act, that they're often a transfer of land that is quite often actually has a huge amount of natural significance, and yet there's no option to go elsewhere because of the fact that this was part of their settlement. So it's really recognising that they should be treated differently, and the way that this land is developed should be treated differently. So again, that's a carve-out. It doesn't mean that you can go in and just destroy everything, but it just needs to, it's a more enabling approach than other areas. And finally, the identification and protection of taonga species, which is something required by the NPS, is an enormous task, and we feel that this is best addressed through a future plan change, because we just simply don't have the resources or the time in which to implement that requirement under the NPS at the moment. And it is quite an isolated thing that we can kind of package up and do separately. We have 8 years in which to implement the NPS for taonga species, so there's plenty of time.
Can I ask a question? What is a taonga species, for example? Like,
okay, also defined. Or at least I think it was defined. I think it's defined somewhere else. Essentially, you work alongside mana whenua to identify those species that have an elevated level of significance, and it may be for a number of reasons. They're also typically indicator species, so they'd say if a particular shellfish species is showing some decline in its health, that's because the environment in which it lives is also declining, and so it's an indicator of that environment.
Sally.
Thank you. This is so not my wheelhouse, so please bear with me. I'm trying to understand the hierarchy between a national policy statement and what I understand are changes to come to the RMA. Is anything that you're sharing with us today potentially going to be changed as a result of the RMA changes?
Yes. So, so we've got the national policy statement, and that is really in a lot more detail, I guess, gives effect to things like Section 6 of the RMA. So it'll say, in the RMA, it might say, protect Indigenous biodiversity, whereas the NPS says, this is how you do it. And then it's up to the district plan to implement that, to put in place the rules and protection measures for that. There have been signalled changes from the central government to the actual NPS itself, as well as down the track, changes to the RMA. So there has been some signals around what they want to change in the NPS, but we don't have that at the moment. We don't know. It's got a number of processes to go through, select committee, etc. And so the decision was made to box on to meet our timeframes around the proposed district plan, knowing that in the future there may be a chance that a high chance that we have to do some variation or a plan change.
Thank you.
So as you know, when we notify a variation, we need to do an assessment of different options for managing SNAs, and we have to assess and identify the most efficient and effective way of managing this SNA. So what I'm going to talk about now is we have identified 4 options that we're going to discuss, and then we're going to talk about our recommended preferred option as well. So the first option is basically not doing anything, staying as we are, so we don't protect SNAs, we don't have anything in our district plan. It's not really a very viable option because we have a national policy statement and they had high risk that we can lose that little biodiversity that we currently have. So we're not really entertaining this one at all. There's some risk and benefit in your presentation. You can read it if you need any more detail, but I think it's just a pretty obvious discarded option. The second one is to go out with the same approach that we discussed in the draft district plan. In the draft district plan, we got a report. There were 32 sites identified as SNAs and another classification called local SNAs. At the time when we discussed this with you many years ago, you wanted to manage both classification of SNAs and local SNAs in the same way. So we went out to the public and the draft with that policy approach. There's some pros and cons with this one as well, but the main thing is that we now have an NPSIB, and we have assessed these sites again, the new criteria. So we really don't think it is a very good option. The option 3, which I think that you requested we look into at the last workshop, is to have a bespoke planning framework to manage SNIs. There are some concerns about that, but in a nutshell, this means that we're going to look at the sites that are owned by Napier City Council, so public land, and we have a strong management approach and avoidance approach in that, and then we have a different policy approach for privately owned SNIs, which mean for example, the East Valley, East Hills areas are privately owned, and we have more enabling management in that one as in that area. We really, as officers, and we think that is not really best practice. It's like when you try to do bespoke zoning in your city, it's very difficult. Why a commercial site would be different from other commercial site, or a residential area different to other. You apply rules consistently across the city, and also it's in what you're trying to protect here are the values of the ecosystem and biodiversity. If you have different rules according to land ownership, what does it stop you then landowners coming always to say, okay, why don't you manage my site different? My land is different, and they can argue about that. So to keep it consistent despite of the land ownership is the clearest approach, because that's what you're really managing is the values. So this, again, this pros and cons, so we really encourage this approach. However, in the management of SNIs, I think we need to consider the balance of really protecting those SNIs, but also enabling the landowner to do the simple activities that they would do in the day-to-day on the land. So just not be extremely restrictive, so they cannot mow the lawn or put a little shade in the backyard. So there's a few things that we want to enable, and that is going to be taken into consideration. And finally is the option 4, which Fleur is going to talk in detail about this, which is our preferred approach.
Sure. Okay, so the tiered approach is really the only approach that meets the requirements of the NPSIB. So that's got something good going for it, legal compliance. So this tiered approach is to protect all of the SNAs that have been identified. And so with the reassessment that was done using the criteria for determining SNAs under the NPS, there was actually a reduction down to 16 sites from the 30 two, three, that was previously identified. And then also there's another, I guess, tier of areas that were identified as being significant but didn't meet the criteria, and they are restoration sites, and that's the ecological corridors and buffers. And so the NPS is quite clear on how we manage our SNAs. It is a very avoid and protect direction, but the way that we manage our other areas, ecological corridors, buffers, restoration sites, etc., it's a lot more flexible in the way that we manage it. So I guess that there are some risks associated with this approach. Obviously, community dissatisfaction both ways. If you're a landowner and you've got an SNA on your land and you don't want to have any regulation around that, you might not be happy with what we're proposing. On the other hand, if you are a interest group very much interested in biodiversity and you think we should be more protective, maybe they might not be happy with that either. So there's potential there for community dissatisfaction either way. And also reduce SNA coverage from what we had proposed in the draft, because we are reducing the number of sites down to 16. The benefits, clearly it meets our NPS requirements, so that's always a plus. The restoration sites, which includes the corridors and buffers, again, that community resilience and obviously the benefits taking a more balanced approach so that we can be protective where we need to be and then a lot more kind of encouraging for those other areas. So our recommendation is to have the tiered approach.
So of the 16 that remain, does that include some of those areas that we know were very contentious with the property owners, sort of like out in Bayview and places like that? Yes. Of course it does.
They have definitely been refined, though. They have been refined.
Okay.
Yes, and a lot of the fragmentation areas have been taken out after further assessment. So it is, but that is one of the most prominent with the estuaries. Yeah.
Okay.
So under the tiered approach, we are less likely to have legal challenge.
I think it's not so much the approach. I think it's more that it's the remapping. So our new ecologist did the remapping and classified in accordance with the NPS, and that has shrunken the areas, but there might be some people who still dispute that maybe it's an SNA. In terms of the way that we manage it, the NPS is very directive on that, so there's not a lot of wriggle room for how we manage those sites if they are classified as SNA, which is that work that we've done. So I can imagine there will still be some upset landowners.
They can still participate in the process, so they can get their own ecologists to debate the findings of ours, and then you go into expert discussions. So there are ways that they can continue being involved. Yeah.
Hayley?
Just thinking back to those conversations we had with the Eskill residents, and acknowledging that probably some of the drivers were, I don't want to be told what to do on my land. Some of the points that they raised that I thought were quite valid were sort of the impression that they had around double standards and the fact that they thought we were using their mahi to achieve the 10% and basically sort of, being lazy and avoiding having to do it ourselves, we're going to use their work. So I suppose in order to do that, we need to be seen to be walking the talk. And I know it's a different stream of work, but that, I don't know, that thing that we put in the LTP around the rewilding trials, I think when this goes out, that comms piece around the restoration we are doing, I just think it's really important that we're seen to be doing that restoration on our land ourselves.
That is a really good point, and actually the Ahuriri Regional Park is part of that. It's a big part of, we're hoping that it's going to be a big part of that increasing that 5% to 10%. So yeah, you're right. That is a really good point, and we would do that.
Juliet?
My question is, how's this communicated to residents? Like, will they have a letter or something to tell them what this new rules are going to be, or if there's any changes?
Yeah, we've got some slides coming up on that. Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Any other questions before I go?
No, keep going.
Yeah, so essentially, it's really a continuum. So you've got less restrictive provisions where we're talking about district-wide biodiversity areas, some moderate restriction where we're talking about ecological corridors, and the most restrictive provisions that apply to our significant natural areas. And this is a very busy slide, but really what all this really does is demonstrate that there's a number of activities that we would expect to have happen within SNAs, such as trimming, pruning, maintenance, removal and clearance, earthworks, those sorts of activities, and we need to think about what does the NPS direct us to do for these activities. So, and how we treat these three kind of areas differently. So district-wide biodiversity areas, the least amount of regulation right through to SNAs. And it's not just the activity itself, but what does the impact on our on the biodiversity or the ecological functioning of those SNAs have. So it's really just saying there are going to be some minor activities that you can do that will be permitted subject to standards, but all in all, a lot of them will require resource consent. And if it's a significant natural area, we're really trying to avoid any activities that can have a big impact on our ecological functioning. And then again, those exemptions will, on the bottom of that table, show that this will be much more enabling for, those kind of activities that have a public good or for specified Māori land. There's a question mark for the specified Māori land because we need to work alongside mana whenua to work through how we best manage their land. So yeah, that's not to be determined yet.
Yeah, and just wanted to highlight as well, because Ahuriri Station has been part of that land offer for redress. The Ahuriri Station has a number of SNAs on that land. So we definitely would have to continue engagement with mana whenua even after the district plan to potentially enable some activities in there if that's what they would like. And next step, just getting to the end, really, want to talk about engagement. We talk about mana whenua that is going to happen in the next month, within the next 2 weeks in October. But also a discussion with East Hill resident. We wanted to hear about your appetite for pre-engagement. Cognizant that we have engaged with them more than anybody else throughout these 7 years. We have numerous discussions, numerous meetings. I believe that we know what they want. They have been very clear that they don't want any rules. We are at a point that is a little bit difficult for us to continue the discussion because we have a national policy statement that we didn't have in the past. So we propose in a letter before the notification, obviously, and send them a draft chapter with the opportunity to provide feedback, but really important to invite them to participate in the legal process when we notify the PDP. That's really our recommendation. And if we are very optimistic and mana whenua engagement goes really well, we want to notify the variation in November this year with feedback finishing early December.
How long?
The SPP will include content around the national policy statement now being in place.
Yes,
That wasn't previously.
that's right. yes, because that is really what it mainly, the main change since we last saw them to now. We have discussed that it was coming, and we saw a draft of the NPS at a point in time, but that wasn't a legal document, and now it is. So there's not opportunity for council to say, no, we don't want to do anything with SNAs anymore, or ignore the areas that have been identified as SNAs.
Is there also a risk, however, if they've got their finger on the pulse, they may well be aware that the new government has said that they are looking at the NPS and may well change it or withdraw it, or I think we would need to be really cognizant of that as well.
Yeah, and they definitely, I think that would be raised. We
Yeah.
have received legal advice, and our legal advice has said, you know, you have a current NPS, you need to abide to the current
Yeah.
NPS, because that is the legislation that you have in front of you at the moment.
We also have Section 6 of the Act of the RMA, which requires us to protect Indigenous biodiversity.
Yeah.
The NPS just draws out a bit more detail around how we do that. So yeah, we acknowledge that there may be some change coming,
Yeah.
but
We have to operate under the current
we need to
legislation.
operate under the current.
Yeah, I guess I think we need to be cognizant of that because they will be aware of it,
Yeah.
that group, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And we
So-
receive numerous submissions at the moment to the proposed district plan, arguing that the RMA is going to be amended as well or repealed. Why are we doing this? So there has been people come to you with why are you doing this or not doing that because of preempting the future legislation. So yeah, not even in according to SNA in other areas of the plan too.
Juliet?
Are you communicating with the whole of Esk Valley or just the Napier side of the Esk Valley, or is it all of them, the ones that finish on the Napier boundary, or
Just our one.
Just within our jurisdiction.
just the boundary?
Yeah,
Up to
just
the
within
Napier boundary?
Napier.
Okay.
Yeah, just within Napier jurisdiction. So Hastings would be doing the same exercise, and they're looking at, it's a nice in the area. So any other further questions?
Questions?
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. Well, it feels like we're stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place and we can only do what the current legislation is and navigate our way through it. Because we don't even have any idea of timeframes of what, if there is changes coming through, do we? It's just, yeah.
What they'll be.
Or what they'll be.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so no, I'm happy with the recommendation that you've put forward and the next steps, so, yeah.
Can I ask a question? There's a couple of sites I know about. One is Friends Bush, and the other is the bush that's been planted at Tamatea High School, the Ngāhere. Are they included in this inventory?
I don't think the Tamatea High School one is.
I don't remember that one, but the French bush.
Friends
yes,
Bush is.
Yes,
We can provide you with some
we
more
have one.
answers in more detail.
Sorry?
Sorry, we can provide you with, we can have a look at the report and come back to you if that helps.
Yeah. I mean, it would be good if we can encourage people to do these things on their own property, as both of those landowners have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like the cross-country drain, isn't it, all the planting?
That's right. Yeah, it's just about got to that stage, isn't it?
I mean, it needs to grow back up.
Yeah, the MPS has really clear criteria in order to actually meet what is an SNA. And so the ecologist doesn't really have any grey to, it either is or it isn't, according to the criteria. So, the likelihood of having very young plantings is unlikely to meet that criteria. So,
20 years
Not
time.
established yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
But early,
a little bit early. It might
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
significant yet.
Come back in 20 years.
Yeah.
Benefit of getting older, eh?
And let's hope that the next time we review the district plan, in whatever shape or form, we're going to have that 10% of ecosystem and biodiversity, because it really is, it's very sad for the city and the residents to be in this position.
And not just
They're
the,
doing a big lot of planting at the Mission Hills, eh? You know, on
Yes.
that space.
Yes.
that's, you know, that looks over Church Road. It's quite a massive lot of planting going to go in there.
I think that's probably part of washing the water.
Oh, yeah, but eventually it will be a significant site, won't it?
Yeah,
It's quite-
eventually.
You know, we are so small, that's quite actually a big chunk of land that.
Yeah, and I think it's not just about that 10% target, but the assessment that was done showed that the average size of SNAs in Napier were like 1.53 hectares, which is marginal for supporting, you know, a really good functioning ecosystem. So, yeah, we need to join all those up
Yeah.
and not just protect isolated pockets.
Are we working on a strategy with that within our planning team?
What was
With
that,
our
sorry?
research team.
Yeah, within our strategic planning, we're working on increasing our biodiversity on our land.
In our,
Through-
yeah.
Through the reserves management
Through the
plan, I would
reserve
imagine, yeah.
Just a question, can it include streets with trees that have got lots of native birds in? Can it include that or not? Does it have to be?
No,
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't meet the criteria. Oh, are you talking about ecological corridors?
It's Morris Street in Napier South. It's got bellbirds and tui and wood pigeons all in that street, and fantails, and they all live down there.
Yeah,
Morris
That,
Street.
that would be part of the mobile phone.
yeah. There's also a thing called highly mobile fauna, which we can also provide some protection of, but it's obviously quite difficult to do that given they're so mobile.
The regional council would have to do that work, though. Yeah. So they would be looking at those corridors for that mobile fauna and bird.
Same as my trees and my-
Excellent. Thanks, team. End of a long day. Some good questions there. Stay
Yeah, thank
engaged.
you very much.
Thank you.